Hey, let's talk some politics, shall we? Let's
Absolutely.
do that. So, does Ukraine's attacks inside Russian territory only serve to galvanize the Russian people against the West?
I think that it's very apparent at this point that Western leaders want World War III to commence. I mean, so you can see even just from statements from several popular world leaders this week, someone like Justin Trudeau went on record saying that he supports Ukraine using long range NATO provided weapons deep into Russian territory. Joe Biden did not give quite as strong of a statement about it, but he's also hinted that he supports it privately. And then you had Putin himself making a statement to Russian television saying that if Ukraine uses these long term weapon systems, he will consider that to be direct warfare with the US, with NATO, and with European countries, and that it will lead to kinetic war with our countries. So I think that they're going mask off at this point. I believe that their intentions to assassinate Donald Trump also have to do with this because I think that the United States, the deep state, as we like to call them, I think that they're convinced that Donald Trump will not allow this war to continue to progress. They know that he's going to make a deal with Vladimir Putin and with Zelensky and actually end this conflict and likely concede some territory to Russia that was, now officially part of Ukraine. So, Johnny, I think these people are brazen and open faced with their intention to lead us into world war. And I believe the reason that they want to lead us into world war is because that will justify the greatest restrictions on freedom of speech, freedom of movement, access to information. I mean, if we're in a kinetic war, imagine the types of things that they will categorize as misinformation or malinformation that people are posting on the internet. I think it sort of gives them like a COVID type situation times 100 because fear is a very powerful motivator for people, and a kinetic warfare is something that assuredly will scare the crap out of many people across the world.
Is it now do or die time for the neocons? Is it a case where if they don't get to spark World War III, then the attention will turn upon their behavior and they will no longer be able to keep control? Is this the ultimate moment in the history of the Western world?
You know, Johnny, I tend to agree with that statement, primarily due to one reason. The neocons and the establishment political class, at least in the United States, and from what I see abroad, I think that with the freedom of information as it is today on the internet, people can see all different types of sources. They can see alternatives to whatever the mainstream narrative is. And if you look at recent polls over the last 4 or 5 years, I think the trust of media in general polls is now down to the single digits. The last I looked at was 11% on a poll by ABC News or something, some big news organization here in the US. But people just simply do not buy the mainstream narrative anymore. And I think that if this trend continues, what you'll start to see is sort of a form of mass non-compliance with some government rules sometimes, because if people truly do not respect or believe a point of authority, they begin to sort of circumvent or avoid actually following their rules. So I think the neocons right now understand that if this trend continues any further, they're going to lose almost all institutional respectability. They're going to undergo a great deal of reputational harm. And basically, no one's going to listen to anything they have to say. So I think they're trying to sort of reset the gaming system, if you will. Like, you think of like an old school Nintendo. They're pulling the game out, blowing on the thing, and putting it back. And I really think that, yes, I do think it's now or never, because if they are not able to do some type of black swan event or throw us into a major war, I don't think they're going to be able to reverse this trend of the public basically not buying what they have to say.
Yeah, and they're desperate to keep that going on because that's all that keeps them in control at the moment. Their manipulation is really at every level. I mean, people don't really understand things like Hamilton 68 and others were run by neocon institutions like the Alliance for Security and Democracy out of the German Marshall Fund and were basically CIA operations. So this is obviously, it's so sad to see how intelligence, the octopus, the tentacles have wrapped around every part of society in a way that it's now crushing society. And we're now seeing freedom squeeze out, the want for freedom burst into the fore. So that's a positive side of it. Now, talking about freedom and slavery, if Kamala Harris does sign an executive order to give reparations for slavery, will families of all slaves, regardless of color, be considered, do you think?
No, definitely not. It's going to be strictly foundational Black Americans. So if you are someone from African descent that does not have roots traced back to the times of the Civil War here in the States, then no, you would not be eligible for those funds. Now, I don't think that. I mean, Johnny, there's going to be such a great deal of resistance to that by virtually ever. And like, it's nothing against Black people. Like, I'm a white guy. I have no hate in my heart, but you're going to see anyone that's not getting that money absolutely have a major outcry. And the statistical reality is, African Americans only make up 13-14% of the United States population. And I just don't think there's enough people that are in a good enough financial situation to, with a clear conscience, with a good conscience, feeling good about it, make a decision that that's the appropriate course of action for our country. So I don't think that's going to happen, although there's a lot of momentum that's building up for it. There's certainly a large swath of people that do want it. There's certainly a large swath of people that believe that these people have been foundationally wronged historically, and that they've faced a great deal of prejudice and an uphill battle in getting, achieving the American dream, if you will. So I just think it's another part of their planned division in the United States, because as we know, it's divide and conquer, and the U.S. has never been more truthfully racially divided as it's been the last 5-10 years, especially since Donald Trump took a hold. I don't think that's fair. I think that they did that on purpose in order to sort of blame it on Donald Trump. But I don't think the reparations are going to happen, but I do think you're going to see the political conversation around it only intensify. And Kamala Harris will do nothing but throw gasoline on that fire.
Yeah, of course. That's what the fire's there for. And I'll tell you a little secret, and a secret to the people who are actually in the chat as well. Not many people know what I'm doing because I'm an investigative journalist who looks at certain topics that no one else looks at and follows leads that no one else looks at. I often have to keep everything I'm doing completely on the download. But I am currently writing a book about Jack the Ripper. And one of the things that I discovered during that period, when I researched the history, is after the slave trade that we know about in America, where African people often sold African people onto white men onto the ships and across to America, etc. What you find after that ended is that places like Liverpool in the UK, which were one of the main docks ports in the UK in the 1800s, were actually selling Irish children into slavery and servitude on the ships, and we're selling lots of poor white kids. If you couldn't afford to make a living in the UK back then they would sell you onto these ships and you would be a slave. And I think trying to work out, people just don't have a good understanding of history, and they don't understand that a lot of slavery wasn't just black, it was anybody who was poor. And if you're going to give reparations for people, and probably have to give a lot of reparations to just poor people from the past, and that would be a really hard one to work out. Listen, I'm going to skip the headlines to continue speaking. There's a couple of questions from the chat for you that I'd like to get onto. Martin has asked, is it not about the fact that Western financial system is bust and the pensions and retirement funds are not there?
So I think the greatest issue with the financial situation in the United States right now has to do with the limited supply of home. There's very little homes available to actually purchase in the U.S. right now. So you're getting, it's not to, I'm not trying to sideswipe this person's question, but I don't think things like pensions are the issue right now. I think what's happening that's causing one of the greatest, the widest economic gaps as far as citizens are concerned in the United States is since 2020, since COVID, you saw interest rates climb from about 2.5% all the way up to about 8.5%. At that same time, home values, as home values skyrocketed, the supply of available homes went significantly down because over 75% of mortgages are under 3% in the United States. So they're locked into this low rate. They don't want to sell their homes, which means there's none available, which means property values are absolutely skyrocketing. This is allowing companies like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard to buy the majority of single family homes that are available in the United States. And that's what you're seeing now over the last 2.5 years. So when you hear the old World Economic Forum line of you will own nothing and you will be happy, the number one way that they do that is by swallowing up the availability of you to buy a single family home. And that's exactly what they're doing right now. And it's happening at such a pace where I'll give you a stat. In 2020, the average salary for a U.S. citizen to get an average home loan was $59,000. As it stands today, that is now $119,000 just in 4 years. The average home price was $292,000 in 2020. That is now $426,000 in 2024. These are economic conditions. I'm a 36-year-old man. I've had a business background for over 10 years. It's even difficult for me. But imagine if you're 20 years old, you're 18, you're just getting out of college, you're just getting out of secondary school. I mean, these kids that have normal 40-hour-a-week jobs that are busting their tails, they're not able to get ahead in life. And one of the greatest ways to sort of ruin the American dream or to ruin one's own desire to reach their own potential is to extinguish any bit of hope that they may have for a better future. And right now, in America at least, it's almost as if just existing and getting by is the best you can hope for, because if you're a young man trying to get a wife, a family, be able to support everyone, to be able to buy your own home, it's looking bleaker than it has in decades, Johnny. So we're going to need some major changes to our system, particularly to our financial system, because this is a trend that can't continue, or we're going to have the type of wealth divide that you really only hear about in storybooks, man. So it's scary. It's a scary situation, and it's getting worse.
No, that's a good answer as well. And I always think about my nan and my grandpa. They were deciding when they finished their retirement, when they finished running pubs in Cardiff, and rough pubs as well. They had a choice between two houses to buy. One, which is probably worth about 500,000 today, was for sale for 9,000 back then. This was in the early 80s, and the other one was for sale for 12,000, 13,000, and they decided to go for the cheaper one. The one that was worth 12,000 now is worth about $1.5 million to 2 million. And I mean, these sort of prices are just insane. No one can get. I mean, the idea for me to own my own home, I'd have to be extremely lucky. A lot of us will. Now, there's another question from the chat. Joel Allen has asked, is Ukraine the new Afghanistan in context of money laundering and the like?
Yes, I think that it's actually almost worse, though, because Afghanistan was still largely a rural and undeveloped country with a difficult terrain, with no huge major cities. They lacked global infrastructure, and they lacked, short distance to many other European nations that are viable, and that people, it just makes it easier to travel to Ukraine. So yes, if you look into it, the most famous example of this would be Hunter Biden being on the natural gas board of Burisma. many DC politicians actually even have their children working in Ukraine because the money laundering operation is so out of control that they're able to enrich themselves, or they're able to, a classic way is to like employ one of their kids with a defense contractor that's working in Ukraine. And then you get all this government money going there. And what's been pretty well known at this point is there's a bunch of Ukrainian bureaucrats and Ukrainian army officials that apparently they're driving around in Lamborghinis. They've got crazy properties. Clearly this country is just totally abusing our aid. And of course, they're getting kickbacks. United States officials and United States politicians are assuredly getting kickbacks from this. So yes, that's the reason why you're seeing the administrative state so desperate to keep this conflict going. They know they can't win. There's legitimately a 0% chance that Ukraine is going to somehow beat Russia. What do we think, that Ukraine is going to take over Moscow and actually take over Russia? That's not possible. So the only other motivation for this is to do what the military-industrial complex does, which is wage wars, banker wars, to enrich all sides and to continue to keep us under their thumb. So yes, the answer, it is the new Afghanistan. It is the new Iraq. And they're going to keep this conflict going just as long as possible. Enough so they're motivated enough to even try to kill a former president and, the leading nominee for the Republican Party.
Will Trump make it to election day, do you think?
Johnny, that's a good question. I think it's anybody's guess, but what I can tell you is I think there is going to be another attempt. And one of the reasons I think that is actually, again, because they want to continue this war with Ukraine. And if it's not President Donald J. Trump, it's going to be President J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is someone he is intimately tied to the security state and to the three-letter agencies here in the United States. The establishment and the donors and the billionaire class that actually is supporting Donald Trump right now, they know that J.D. Vance is going to do whatever they say as far as foreign policy and continuation of wars. And you even heard in J.D. Vance's very first interview after being named VP nominee with Sean Hannity, the very first thing he says, without even being asked about it, is we got to come out and we got to hit Iran hard. Look, I'm not a big fan of Iran, but I'm also not a big fan of people discussing unprovoked warfare unless a nation is directly threatening us. So I think J.D. Vance is a bit of an establishment neocon wearing America First clothing, and I think that he's pro-war. And I think that there's many motivations to get Donald Trump out of the picture because they know whoever is left making those decisions is going to continue that war, whether it's Kamala Harris or whether it's J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance will come out and act like he's against the war, but he's ultimately going to say, well, we have to support democracy. We have to support freedom around the world. So I'm not buying it for 1 second that he's truly against it. And yes, I do think Donald Trump is at increased risk because everyone around him seemingly is pro-war.
Yeah, I feel that J.D. Vance is somewhere between a liar and a contrarian, and that makes sense because he's a teal boy through and through, and that is an extremely dangerous side to be edging your bets on. And unfortunately, I mean, it's a very strange amount of bedfellas and strange types of bedfellas that the Trump campaign has got.